All right, everyone. Really quickly, before we get started learning about HTML elements and the tags that designate them, I want to point you to a extension called Live Server by Ritwick Day. If you install this, you can go ahead and select any file, right-click on it, and it will open up a virtual server. It does a lot of cool things, most of which are beyond the scope of this course, but one of the cool things that it does do, which is incredibly helpful, is it will automatically refresh the browser page when you save your changes. Sample changes. Save. So now I don't have to go over here and click refresh every time. I'm going to be using that, so keep that in mind. If you are using Visual Studio Code, I strongly encourage it. And one of the first elements I want to introduce to you is called the paragraph element. Now, the paragraph element is generally used to enclose text that ends up on the page, much like this, and it's designated with just the letter P. So a set of tags with just the letter P. We can go ahead and grab our normal text and put it inside of here. Now, it doesn't change anything as far as the way that the actual page looks, but when you get into JavaScript and styling later on with CSS, it's going to be a very good habit to get into that'll save you some time later on if you start enclosing all of your plain text in paragraph tags. Now, the next element that I want to bring up to you is the header element. This paragraph text is fine for basic page content, but if we wanted to put the title of our website here, or the title of our widget homepage element, that's not very impressive. It's not very obvious that that's the title. So we want something that commands our attention, and we could use a header element for that. The header element is going to involve the letter H and an integer. Those are going to be the tags that designate the header element. The H1 is going to be the largest of the headers. So we're going to do widget homepage, and we're going to save that. You can see we've got a new element with some text in here, and it's much larger, very bold, got some space below it. Definitely important, especially if you put it at the top of the page. Usually this is to indicate the title of the particular article or page or website that you're on in the first place. Now you can change the number that's involved here. So H1 is going to be the largest, but H2, for example, is going to be just a bit smaller. So we could do widget homepage just to show you. It's a little bit smaller. It's not quite as obviously the center of attention. These are useful if you want to create a title at the top with H1s, and then H2s could maybe break down the titles of paragraphs or sections, and it allows you to break down your page, make it more legible, easier to navigate, and designate what is where. Another thing you can do if you want to make it much easier for people to read things is something like a list. Now, there are two kinds of lists in HTML. There are ordered lists and unordered lists. We'll start with ordered lists. So those are going to be OL for ordered list, and that's going to create an element that has a series of items inside it. But each item needs to be designated with an LI, with LI tags. That's going to designate the list item element. Within the list item, we can type whatever we want. So maybe we'll call this the shopping list. And then one list item might be milk. And then after that, we've got LI, eggs. After that, we've got, if I can type, bread. Now we'll just get rid of all that and save it. So we can see that the OL, ordered list element, has created a series of sub-elements that involve numbers. So we've got milk, eggs, and bread. Each one of these list items will designate a different item on that ordered list. If we swap this to UL, which stands for unordered list, it's going to convert those numbers into bullet points. People like bullet points if you have some information that you want to break down into quick and easy bullets or a list of some kind rather than a full-on sentence. This makes it much, much easier to interpret and understand. And this is going to be a great tool for you to use when you learn how to use CSS styling later on as well, because you can manipulate the way that the list actually displays things. Like, for example, I've turned a series of, I've created a list with social media icons in it and then turned it sideways so that I can get them all in a perfectly nice little row. And you can use other things for that as well, but it's a good tool to have in your toolbox. Another useful tool you'll probably find yourself using quite a bit if you develop with HTML seriously is the button. Now, the button doesn't have any abbreviations for its tags, it's just a button tag. And inside the button, we can type pretty much whatever we want, and we don't have to worry about enclosing it in paragraph tags or anything like that. We can just call it my button. Over here, we can click on it, see that it flashes. It's got some different styling. The buttons are interesting in that they can do lots of other things. If we create the onClick attribute, we can set this up to do pretty much whatever we want. If we have any JavaScript functions that we end up writing into this file later on or importing from somewhere else, we can call them right here. But we don't need to worry about anything like that right now. We just want to do a simple window.open with a set of parentheses and some single quotes. I'm just going to go over here and grab a URL, paste it in, save. And now when I click on this, it'll open that URL, which happens to be Wikipedia, but it'll do it in a new tab. There's lots of different things you can do with buttons. For now, we're not going to be using that too much for the widget homepage, but it's something to keep in mind in case you ever have a function you need to call or a link you want to be able to go to. There's lots of different ways you could do that. For example, with the anchor tag. Now, the anchor tag does use an abbreviation. It's just the letter A. So we could do something here like my anchor. That's just what it's going to display. Now, the anchor is not a button. It's actually a hyperlink in a real sense. Instead of having to call a function, it's got what's called an href attribute. We can paste a URL into there, and as soon as we click on that, it's going to take us there in the same tab that we're in. Now, if you don't want that, you can go ahead and add another attribute called target. Target is going to include lots of different options, but one of them is underscore blank. If we go ahead and save that, click on this, target blank means that the link will be opened in a new tab within the browser. So now you have two different options on how to get to a URL in a new tab from your page. Now these next two elements are probably going to be hard to understand or at least understand the practicality of them at first, but they're very important for when you end up learning CSS later on. They're called the span and the div. Now, the span and the div are generally just used as elements to segment the page down into different sections. The span does absolutely nothing except allocate all of the content within into a single element that you can then move around with styling and so forth later on. So we could write, here is a span. We could make another span underneath that and say, here is another span. Now, HTML doesn't really care about white space, so all of these are going to appear on the same line. The button, the anchor, span 1, span 2, they're all right here, and it'll just remove all the spaces and new lines until there's only one space left and put it all on the same line like that. Divs don't follow that rule, however. Divs are different than spans in that way. If I were to write, here is a div, and we'll create another div, here is another div, save that, each one of those is going to have their own line. Divs like to break themselves down and display them on a new line. They don't like to be concatenating other elements, so to speak. Now, these don't seem very useful right now because we haven't gotten into any CSS styling. What you can do if you want to force line breaks with our last two elements, these are special elements that don't require closing tags. So we're going to do BR. That stands for break. And there's no closing tags here. It's just a line break. If you've ever used programming languages before, this is effectively the HTML equivalent of /n. We can do another element called a horizontal row, which is HR. Now, it's also going to cause a line break, but it'll insert a black horizontal line in addition to the line break, segmenting the page down even further. This can be a very helpful thing if you want to increase the readability of your page. So for example, if we get this out from the middle of the header, and we undo that as well, we could do something like this right after the title. And then we could, after the shopping list, to indicate that this sort of section is over, we could save it again. Oh wait, no, we wouldn't want that right there. That would actually separate it from the shopping list. So we would want to put it right here. There we go. So we've got our title, and then we've got a section, and then we've got some other stuff that's in a separate section. HRs and BRs are very helpful when you want to format things a certain way and make it easier to read this page top to bottom. The last HTML element I want to teach you guys about is the table. It contains a series of rows and columns, not unlike a spreadsheet, but it is arguably one of the most complicated HTML elements, and it's incredibly difficult to develop without being able to see the borders and all of that. But in order to see those things, we're going to need CSS styling. So in the next video, we're going to be covering table elements, table rows, table cells, and the basics of CSS styling as well.